pulling off these covers for the exhaust manifolds because I need to start figuring out what I'm going to use for exhaust manifolds. Now, the truck manifolds dump back here, and I really don't want hot exhaust dumping right on my feet. So once I get these off, I'll show you what I've got for manifolds here. This manifold, which drops straight down instead of coming back, which will work. I was really hoping I could use this one, which would center dump it, keep the exhaust a little further forward off of my feet, but that ain't gonna happen. So I'm thinking either keep these left and right, or let's see if I can flip them and see if that'll work. Oh, I really hate to do this, but this flange is just not gonna run where I need it to run for using a stock manifold. I'm actually gonna have to run some headers, so here's what it is. All right, I've tried 2 different sets of block hugger headers, exhaust manifolds. The manifolds fit and clear the engine block and everything, but they won't clear the front drive line once you get this intermediate shaft in. This set of headers I got through Off-Road Design, Sanderson headers, they come close. They hit the engine mount right here. So my thinking is you can change the shape of this tube and it won't affect the flow, so I can do that. But I think I'm also going to notch, so I want to make a couple of marks where my notch goes. And notching we will go. All right, you want to make sure you have enough clamps on the front side and the back side so that when things settle in a little bit, you're not going to get a bunch of things rattling and squeaking and stuff like that. Now we'll see where we line up. All right, I've got a solid 1/8 inch all the way around the header. Now, downside is I also have to worry about the nut that goes on here. So based on the clearance I have here, I'm gonna have to use a steel locking nut, or I'll have to put the bolt in from the back side, then put the header on, which isn't a big deal. Either way, it's just kind of how it's gonna have to go. But this will at least work. I can get this exhaust pipe down underneath the oil pan and drop it to the other side. Just a little bit of a close-up you can see right here. And I've got daylight all the way around it, so it's good. With the headers in, it was off to the exhaust shop. I had the exhaust shop run a Y pipe from the passenger side to the driver's side, and then we're gonna straight pipe down the driver's side with a flange and a muffler. He was able to do as much as he could within the configurations that were already there in this buggy. He couldn't get the oxygen sensor on the driver's side where I really needed it, so I'm gonna have to change that. He put a flange in, but it didn't really work where I wanted it, so I chopped that flange off. But he did make me a little section pipe and the muffler and tailpipe that I'll be able to rotate and figure out exactly where I want that and weld it in. So magically, we're back from the exhaust shop. Got the oxygen sensor drilled, and I needed the oxygen sensor up here, and it's really tight anyway, but this way it's reading what's coming out of this pipe. They put the exhaust bung down for this side down here, but it had already been infiltrated by the other bank. The other bank has its own oxygen sensor already, so this is kind of a required deal for it to run right. I did have to Dremel the hole out a little bit, and then I also blew this out because I just didn't want any large chunks of metal going through. So now I'm ready to insert the bung and weld. I'm gonna have to tap that in a little bit. Kind of got a little overzealous on the top because I wanted to make sure I covered the existing weld up, and kind of went a little far into the front, so I ground that down just so it had a nice flat surface. And now I've got my bung. This bung I will now put in the back over here. Plug that one off. So I've got these nice thick 1/2-inch exhaust flanges here, 2-bolt. There's a gasket that goes here. So I've got this one tapped on, and I've used a square to make sure it's straight. Now I'm going to tack weld this side, then I will line the muffler, make sure it's straight, and I'll tack that side. Once I make sure it's in the spot I want, then I'll weld the other side. Everything's tacked in enough. I can pull this out now and finish welding everything, put the gasket in. And I don't need to put the gasket in right now, because this is still just a mock-up. Exhaust is fully in, but I've got it just above the cross member. Remember, my seats are clear up here, so at some point I'll put some tabs in up here, and I'll wrap a heat shield over this, and that way it will keep me a little cooler in the cockpit. Now you can see the seat bracket up there, so there's plenty of room. My floor should be somewhere around here, but I can run tabs here and then wrap heat shield down, and that way I can protect the cab a lot more from heat. Now this muffler is called a turbo tube. It's not a glass pack. It should be somewhat quiet, but I'm real happy with where the exhaust is now. And it dumps out the side. I thought about dumping it down, but then it blows dirt up, so I got it dumping out the side and towards the back. Back to a little bit of experimenting. This tin that you can get down at the hardware store for doing like stovepipes and stuff, I thought it would be really good for doing heat shields, but it is thin enough that I think it's going to rattle too much, even after I beat it over this edge. So back to the aluminum. I'm just bending a couple of pieces of aluminum, and I'll secure them about that far off of the exhaust. Try to create an extra layer of absorption before heat gets to the floor. Took some little pieces of 1-inch tube, drill a hole in it, weld a nut on the back, cut the bottom out so it'll actually go around, and I can weld this to the curve of the exhaust pipe. Drill a hole about, just a few inches in on each side. Center this where I want, and then tack weld the pieces in. Kind of like I do on the other dash and tin work I'm doing. Now to drill some holes. And you can see that'll sit down on the exhaust. I'll tack weld these on. And I built another one for the front half of the pipe, and then I had to put a little notch here where the flange is so that it would go over that. But again, just another layer of heat absorption before it gets to me. There you have it. Front heat shield. Got about 2.5 inches between this shield and the floor. Same thing, I've got this heat shield, and then the seat's up here, but don't forget I've also got a pan which will act as a secondary heat shield under the seat. So I'm really hoping this alleviates a lot of the problem people have with heat. And then I've also got an idea for building a heat shield around the headers too. A lot of times I'll come out here just to look at what I need next, and then I'll just start tinkering with stuff. A couple weeks ago I realized I got this low profile intake manifold, and the supply rails from the truck won't really interchange. Neither will the bolts that hold it down. So I ordered the bolts and ordered a fuel rail kit, and the rail kit got here, so I'm going to tinker with this a little bit, get it ready to disassemble the injectors. Now it doesn't come with the injectors, which I'm fine with, but the rails and the crossover pipes need to be able to work with the low profile stuff. So, some assembly required, and batteries not included as normal, but once I put these all together, I'll start assembling some injectors. Still don't have the injectors in it yet, but this is how this one sits. It's got a cap, an intake, a crossover. This converts the 2-line with the regulator up here to a single line. I'll be able to run the regulator at the tank or at one of those Corvette fuel filter styles. If you've never popped injectors out of the factory rails on these trucks, they're not that bad. Just get a screwdriver and pull the keeper out. The hardest part I've found is you just got to kind of twist and pull until the injector releases. They're sometimes pretty stiff, and that's it. You can get adapters and kind of make these injectors work, but what I can't show you in the video is how nasty these injectors stink. I mean, this is varnish. I doubt if they're going to work really good, but I've got a line on LS-1 injectors, which will make my fuel rails fit correctly. Now, if I adapt these, there's a cone that goes over the top and another O-ring to allow this to bolt into the manifold and seat. I'm not a real big fan of these adapters, so I think I'm going to take a shot at these LS-1 injectors I have and not use the truck injectors. Either way, you don't have to go crazy with injectors. A 25-pound injector will work just fine on this. When you start getting into the high poundage stuff, that's when they get real expensive. So obviously, when you buy a blank, this was a totally blank intake. It's an LS-1 intake. It's got the 3-bolt throttle body. You have to take all the little stuff off of the other manifold, like the bolts and the gaskets and whatever you don't want to buy. off of that old intake and install it to the new one. Now, this plug up here, if you remember that plug I got for that Jimmy's buggy I did the build out on, I'll be getting another one of those for this because I really like that piece better than just a freeze plug. Okay, there's a difference there. Okay, so as you're doing this, you'll discover little differences like this gasket for the truck will not work on the LS-1. So I will have to get a new throttle body gasket, which I don't know, I may have one of those laying around here. We'll see. There are some definite differences between a truck and the LS-1. One of them is your throttle body gasket is different. So I went ahead and ordered the correct gasket for the throttle body, and that just pushes in. That's not a big deal there. So now you can see they're sitting down flat. So I'm going to take some time and do this nice and clean and neat and slow and get all the injectors set in there. Then I'm going to run the crossover line. I just spray a little bit of silicone in my hand and lube up the O-rings a little bit. There's a couple of little places that you got to clear up here where your bolts go in. And just kind of work them down and they'll fit right in. You can feel when the injector's O-ring pushes in and seats. Never used this brand. They're totally aftermarket. But they're willing to put pretty good warranty on them, so I'm not that worried about it. Again, line everything up nice. Make sure your injectors are out of the way. Perfect. If there's something hanging up, you want to know it ahead of time. All right, so I'm going to pull this and this, swap it. Actually, I put them in by hand and forgot about it. Same thing on the O-rings. I lubricate them. And keep in mind, an O-ring fitting is not like a compression fitting. All you have to have them is snug. An O-ring will hold an incredible amount of pressure without a lot of torque on the fitting. While I'm doing these, I'm going to leave this one too. All I want to do is feel it bottom out I don't want to really crank on these. They don't need it. Now these are an AN fitting, so they do need a little more torque than snug. So now I'll counter wrench them. And again, I'm not going gorilla tight. You just don't need to. Should be it. But a lot of you know the cathedral heads. Now these are for a cathedral head, but the LS-1s are kind of an oddball. So the cathedral head gasket won't really work on this manifold. This manifold, the LS-1s require the O-rings. And I don't know if these O-rings will stay in on their own. If they will, that would be wonderful. And they will. So I'm going to go ahead and load these. While I'm doing some adjusting, fixing, building, things like that, this won't actually get bolted down until my final assembly with the engine in it, which is a huge plus to me. So next, I'm going to go ahead and put the throttle body on it. Now remember, there's a tube that goes through here if you want your coolant to get heated up. Yeah, I won't be using that. All right, we'll go get you some bolts. The other thing that you will have to change is the bolts for your intake. The truck bolts will not work. I like trying to assemble stuff pretty readily as I go. And this is a good example of that. It's been apart for a couple of weeks, so the nuts took me 15 minutes to track down. So if you hide stuff from yourself, you'll find it later. And okay, I got my EGR block-off plate in, so install that now. You screw these down, make sure you push the O-ring in as you go. Since I'm getting ready to do a lot of other stuff and where things will fit like hoses and such on the top of the engine, I went ahead and cleaned up the coil carriers and the coils, and I'm going to install those on the valve cover so I can see where they will sit in relation to the intake. Got this coil rail cleaned up. Even though I'm not going to do a lot of detail in painting, I am going to at least clean stuff up so it looks nice. All right, so I got the coil pack set up, and you can see how much higher those sit off the valve cover. That's why I wanted to get kind of the top of the engine put together before I start figuring out where things like the power steering reservoir and some of the other accessories will go. For now, that's going to do it for the exhaust and the intake system. There's going to be a lot more to this on final assembly. Fuel lines, vacuum lines, things like that. Crossover tube where it'll end up finally. As well as some heat shields and things around the headers and more stuff. We will continue on that as I continue with final assembly and final configurations. But we're gaining traction here. Please like, share, subscribe. Thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. And off to the trail. There were only a few of us that decided to go do this night run. This is about 45 minutes before the sun goes down. So once it gets dark and the lights come on, the camera is kind of useless. But I got a couple of my friends that decided to go ahead and jump on Pinch Point, which is a really, really tough trail and one of the reasons I'm building a buggy. Rear steer buggies, so they went ahead and jumped on Pinch Point, and that is definitely a show worth watching. Rears are turned hard left, the front's turned hard left. Doc tracks it. Now he's going to get his front over this nub over here, work his way through the pinch.